Hi, this is Jean Joe, broker and owner of Perisson Real Estate, and welcome to another edition of Perisson Real Estate Pulse. For this video, I'm going to be talking about Proposition 33, which is on the ballot in November here in California. It's also known by the proponents as the Justice for Renters Act, but really it's the repeal of Costa Hawkins. So in order to understand what this is about, you need to go into what Costa Hawkins is. So Costa Hawkins, the Rental Housing Act, was passed in 1995. And basically what it did was to prevent rent control statewide on single family homes, condominiums, and townhomes. So this is to prevent local legislatures from being able to enact rent control that would impact these properties. In addition, there was a carve out for new developments. Anything built after 1995 would be exempt. And so that would ensure that new developments could continue to occur because it would allow for those builders who are coming in to know that those properties would be exempt from any potential local rent control in the future. And finally, it allowed for landlords to establish initial rental rates for a new tenant. So when you have a tenant that moves out and you're bringing in a completely new tenant, you would be able to have a new rate, be able to bring the rents back up to market rate rents. And that's a policy known as vacancy decontrol. So there have been multiple attempts to repeal Costa Hawkins. In 2018, there was Proposition 10 that gives local governments the power to implement extreme rent control. That was rejected by 60% of California voters. And then 2 years later, in 2020, there was Proposition 21, which would change one feature of it to allow cities to implement rent control on buildings that were over 15 years old. And so it would be a rolling 15 years instead of the 1995. That was also rejected by voters of 60% of California voters. And then now it's Proposition 33, and that seeks to repeal or eliminate Costa Hawkins completely. So the main arguments in support of Proposition 33 is the rent is too damn high. It's just unaffordable living here. What this would do is to hope to give cities and counties the option to expand rent control. And then it would put an end to those corporate landlords out there who are charging unfair and affordable rents. So in terms of arguments against Proposition 33, and I do have to pause here to say that the California Association of Realtors is actually coming out against this proposition and encouraging all of us as realtors to get the word out just so that people are aware of what it entails. It would basically, by passing this and eliminating Costa Hawkins, it would allow cities and counties to impose rent control measures without the vote of residents. It would give politicians and unelected boards, so the governing bodies could potentially set up rental boards that would be appointed and not elected to have complete control over prices and rent regulations on single family dwellings, which does include, again, the condos and townhomes. And then it would expand local jurisdictions' ability to impose rent caps on vacant units. So that whole vacancy decontrol that I mentioned, that would go away. And so even if you have a tenant move out, there's potentially a limit to how much you could increase the rate, even if the previous tenant was in at a severely below market rate rent. So I think it's important to now talk a little bit about rent control and how that impacts housing and affordable housing supply. This is important because the whole idea behind the fact that there isn't enough housing, there isn't enough affordable housing, is not something that people are arguing against. I think everybody recognizes that there is a housing crisis in California. No matter how much people are talking about, people migrating out of California and mass migration, there still just is not enough housing for the need that is here. And so I don't think anybody argues that that is important. I think the thing to keep in mind, though, is that by having rent control, does that automatically improve housing? Does that increase the stock of housing supply? Or does it, what kind of an impact that does it have? I have been reading different articles and journals regarding, studies that have been done on the impact of rent control on housing. And it's very interesting if you go into that. One thing is to note that it could actually worsen the housing crisis, not increase it. as housing providers are not able to keep or maintain rental property. So, contrary to popular belief, a majority of actually rental housing is by the mom and pop landlords, and we call them housing providers now because they're the ones providing this rental housing. And as inflation takes hold and the cost of maintaining rental property is difficult, now recently in recent years we've had Prop 19, where if a property is passed on, is inherited, then that could potentially, and if it's investment property, it will be reassessed for property taxes to the current market rate. So that will significantly increase the cost for owners of property. So that combined with inflation, we may be making it untenable for a housing provider, for an owner, to be able to keep or maintain rental property. So they'll either choose to sell it, or they will not be able to maintain it in as good of a condition. So simply adding rent control does not increase the supply at all. And in fact, it could possibly worsen it. Second, it will discourage new construction because the builders and those who purchase new construction, obviously they're going to think about the dollars, right? And so in the long term, does this make sense financially? And if over time, they're not going to be able to raise the rents to keep up with inflationary costs and whatever needs to be done along the way to keep the property habitable and safe, it's not going to make sense. And so we're going to have less new construction going on. And California already has, very restrictive laws. And so construction here in California already is not that easy for builders out there. Here in the Bay Area, we don't have a lot of land as well. So, so as much as possible, we do want to encourage that new construction, multifamily buildings, affordable housing. And so if we do get rid of that carve out, it could actually discourage new construction, which means less, not more affordable housing. Rent control tends to also limit tenant mobility. And so that means tenants choosing not to move even if their situation changes. So if you have a tenant who goes into a property because it's affordable rent, and then perhaps their financial situation changes, and improves along the way, they could still choose not to move simply because the rent is more favorable for them. And that would not open up that affordable housing to somebody else, right, who would be coming in. You could have a situation, and they cite this in one of the studies, where you may have a single person, maybe a widow over the years, is now in the property and just does not want to move, even if the house doesn't make sense any longer for her, simply because the rents are the rent is low and been kept artificially low. And then now you have a family who could use a bigger home, not able to find affordable housing. And so there are some drawbacks to this limit in tenant mobility. In some cases, people say that, well, there's some benefits too, because you do have a neighborhood or a property that's more stable. So that's the argument on the other side. But really, if you have a situation where there is not that fluidity, it could actually work to the disadvantage of the newer tenants who are looking for housing. We do have situations here in San Francisco does have very rigid rent controls, and we do have heard of situations where tenants will actually stay in a property and then they'll move out, but they'll sublease it to another property, another tenant, which they're not supposed to do, but they do, and lease it at market rate rent and keep the difference for themselves. And so that's the kind of behavior that we want to make sure not to encourage. And then researchers at MIT, who are nonpartisan, estimate that measures like Proposition 33 could result in an average reduction in home values of up to 25%. And that makes sense because if you have people who are looking to buy, and you have people who are looking to buy investment property, but they're looking at a jurisdiction and that one happens to have more rigid rent controls that will make it, again, financially not very good along the way, then what will happen is that they will be less inclined to buy property there. And so you have a reduction in the number of interested buyers, and you have a reduction in home values. And it could go up to, these are studies that have been done, and they found that there could be an average reduction in home values of up to 25%, which is not insignificant. And finally, the Nonpartisan State Legislative Analyst Office, or LAO, states that Proposition 33 could result in higher rents, making the state even less affordable. And so we're looking at something that is not increasing the housing stock, that is possibly going to result in higher rents, that is going to result in, and so that's not good for tenants out there, right? And then for homeowners, the property owners, it could make it untenable for them to be able to keep or maintain well their property because it's just financially not possible. And finally, it could discourage even new construction from happening. And so again, nobody argues that we have enough housing or that we have enough affordable housing. I think the important issue is, does this just simply repealing Costa Hawkins, does that result in a possibility of creating better housing situations for everyone out there? But looking at this, for whether it's you're talking about builders, whether you're talking about property owners, whether you're talking about even the tenants and the impacts that can have on them, that is not necessarily the best way to be able to solve the problem. And so with that, again, as I mentioned, CAR, California Association of Realtors, really is inviting people to vote or asking people to vote no on Proposition 33. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, or, it just sounds good. And California is a rental tenant majority state now, has been for quite a few years. And the whole idea of, yeah, we're going to, keep the rents low just sounds on the face of it to be very attractive. But it's going to take a lot more nuance, and it's going to take a lot more of really thinking through the correct policies rather than just slapping rent control on or putting in a rental board. And as you see here, it'll reduce home values as stated by the LAO. Can prohibit charging market rate rent indefinitely if you don't have that vacancy decontrol. I could limit your control on your own property, which I think is super important, just in concept, as a real estate agent, as a homeowner myself. I think this whole idea of our private property rights as an American, right? To be able to have that ability to control your own property and what you want to do with it, if you want to rent it out or if you want to sell it. We don't want to be able to allow for that rent control on single family homes, or eliminate the ability to adjust rent charges, and ultimately to be able to create a loss of revenue to homeowners. And again, that will create a loss for the tenants in the long run. So we do encourage you to vote no on Proposition 33. So I'll stop here for now, but next week I'm going to be continuing with this, and I'll be actually doing a video with Elsie Wu, who is a good friend and colleague. She is the owner and broker of Abundance 99, which is a private lending group. And she has a lot of experience in terms of investments. She works with a lot of people who do as well, and has some thoughts and anecdotes. And I thought it would be really good to be able to kind of bring it down to real world examples. And so we'll be talking about that, as well as Proposition 34, which I did want to talk about as well. So with that, I'll end that for today, but I hope that you found this useful, and I would really encourage you to just look through the information that's out there, and also to share it with your friends and neighbors. And this is not a tenant versus landlord type situation. This is let's do smart, let's get affordable housing in place, but let's do it in a strategic and smart way so that we make sure that we protect the rights of homeowners, that we make sure that we can continue to build up our housing supply, right, and build up the rental inventory, not take that away. And so I think it's really important that everybody take a good look at that. And again, please share this information with your friends and neighbors. For those of you watching, if you can share this video, and also would love to have you subscribe to our channel. We continue to come out with different content like this. So that's it for today. Wishing you all a great rest of your day, and abundance always. Thank you.